President Donald Trump delivers his first address to Congress. Will he be able to work with lawmakers to realize his sweeping agenda? Former RNC Chairman Michael STEELE joins us with analysis. And later, author and editor of CatholicMom.com, Lisa HENDEY is here. She'll take over the show and interview me about Book 2 of my adventure series, Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders. And finally, the Vatican held a controversial workshop this week on biological extinction. Who was invited and who was not? Papal Posse member Raymond Arroyo reports from Rome. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Michael STEELE, Lisa HENDEY, and Raymond Arroyo are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. It was a new tone and tenor for the American president. In a televised address from Capitol Hill, President Trump set aside his tough talk and pointed to a new chapter of American greatness, calling on Congress and the country to unify.
We are one people with one destiny. We all bleed the same blood. We all salute the same great American flag. And we all are made by the same God.
In broad strokes, President Trump laid out his agenda: the destruction of ISIS, creating American jobs, increasing military and infrastructure spending, and health care reform. The speech was widely hailed on the right and left as Trump's best ever. More on the Trump speech in our next segment. And President Trump's immigration reform policies appear to be taking a little more shape, and a comprehensive proposal could soon be at hand. Meeting with news anchors ahead of his address to Congress, Trump said he was open to legislation that would allow some undocumented immigrants to stay in the U.S. The proposal would allow those not convicted of a serious crime to earn legal status for employment and pay taxes. Trump's plan would not necessarily involve a pathway to citizenship, with a possible exemption for the so-called dreamers, young people brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. He supposedly told reporters that the time is right for the comprehensive bill as long as there is compromise on both sides. In his speech to Congress, Trump said U.S. legal immigration policy should protect American workers and be merit-based. He said such a system will save billions in taxpayer dollars, raise all workers' wages, and help struggling families, including those of immigrants, to enter the middle class. And U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced he would recuse himself from any government investigations of the Trump campaign. He made the announcement following controversy over meetings he may have had with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. in the lead-up to the 2016 election. In a press conference on March 2nd, Attorney General Sessions had this to say.
Let me be clear. I never had meetings with Russian operatives or Russian intermediaries about the Trump campaign.
During his Senate confirmation hearings in January, Sessions originally denied having any conversations with Russian authorities, but acknowledged this week that he had two brief meetings with the Russian ambassador in his capacity as a U.S. Senator on the Armed Forces Committee. We'll continue to monitor this story. And a second week of heavy fighting continues in western Mosul, the last urban stronghold for ISIS in Iraq. According to reports, coalition-backed forces have effectively trapped Islamic State militants, cutting off both supply and escape routes. They are now within a half a mile of retaking the city's main government complex. More than 220,000 people have fled since U.S.-backed Iraqi troops launched an offensive to recapture Mosul in October. Of those, more than 175,000 remain displaced. U.S. officials believe the mission to defeat ISIS will take another 6 months. There is one visible sign of progress in Iraq. This past week, in the village of Telekuf Tesquopa, just outside of Mosul, a giant cross was erected atop a hill, marking the return of the Christian faith. Chaldean Catholic Patriarch of Baghdad, Louis Sacco, visited the village, blessed the cross, and celebrated the first Mass there in over 2.5 years. A good sign. And violence against Christians continues in Egypt as hundreds of Coptic families have fled from Sinai amid a series of killings and a call by ISIS to target the minority group. Egyptian President al-Sisi has instructed the government to shelter Christians there after 3 Christians were shot dead last week. There have been 6 targeted killings in the past month. Islamic State militants are attempting an insurgency on the Sinai Peninsula. ISIS video released Sunday calls for violence against Christians, including a rant by one of the militants responsible for the Cairo church bombing that killed 29 people in December. And Brexit hit a slight roadblock this week. On Wednesday, the House of Lords voted that European Union citizens should be guaranteed the right to stay in the UK after its exit from the EU. By a vote of 358 to 256, Parliament's unelected upper chamber inserted the clause into the authorization bill that demands the government begin exit talks with the EU. The change must now go to the House of Commons, where it is likely to be rejected by Theresa May's Conservative majority. There are approximately 3 million EU nationals in the UK. The government has said repeatedly that it plans to guarantee that EU citizens can remain in Britain so long as UK nationals living elsewhere in Europe have the same guarantee. And the Associated Press is reporting that Pope Francis has personally intervened in sex abuse cases by reducing penalties against priests convicted of abuse. Citing Vatican sources, the AP says that on numerous occasions, Francis overturned decisions by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the office charged with sanctioning abusive clerics. These interventions come after personal appeals to the Pope. The most notable case, an Italian priest laicized by Pope Benedict and convicted by an Italian court on multiple counts of abuse, was later fully restored to the priesthood by Pope Francis. And the local bishop where Medjugorje is located said this week that the purported Marian apparitions at the site are false. Bishop Ratko Peric of Mostar Duvno made the statement on the diocesan website. The timing is curious. Just 2 weeks ago, the Vatican announced Pope Francis was appointing a bishop to handle the pastoral needs of the townspeople and pilgrims who visit Medjugorje. Bishop Peric has already said on numerous occasions that the Madonna was not appearing in Medjugorje. In 2014, a special Vatican investigative commission concluded a 4-year study of the alleged apparitions and passed those findings to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. However, to this date, the Vatican has not made an official comment on the results of that study. And a new monastery that is home to 8 Benedictine monks from Oklahoma has been opened in Ireland. This past week, Bishop Michael Smith of the Meath Diocese signed a decree establishing the Benedictine monks a perpetual adoration of the Most Holy Sacrament of the altar at a former convent in the town of Stanmullen. It is believed to be the first new monastery in Ireland since 1536, when King Henry VIII first moved to suppress monastic communities. The Benedictines came to Ireland from Tulsa, Oklahoma in 2012. Now, I realize that we are in Lent, but I wanted to share some video with you. I guess it's of my pre-Lenten preparation. Mardi Gras in New Orleans. My pal Jim Caviezel was king of the crew of Bacchus this year. We had the most incredible time. Now, most people don't realize that these Mardi Gras crews are philanthropic organizations. Bacchus supports Children's Hospital in New Orleans. So Jim and I went there to hand out doubloons, T-shirts, and some Will Wilder books. What an incredible group of kids and parents. Such courage they have. Then the Sunday before Mardi Gras, we took to the streets atop the King's Float to look out at the expanse of families on the street with kids on ladders and whole neighborhoods cooking out together. Was really overwhelming for us. It reminds me, and should remind all of us, that Mardi Gras is truly the largest organic community festival anywhere. Such lovely people. Where else do people literally throw millions of dollars into the streets to bring joy to their fellow man? Many thanks to the Brennan family for making it happen and for their warm hospitality. There is no place like home, whether it's Mardi Gras or Lent or any other time. Now, as many of you know, the second Will Wilder book in my series, Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders, hits bookstores on March 7th. Tonight, I want to announce a special sweepstakes we've started to celebrate the release. We're giving away what we call a Wilder Adventure, an all-expense-paid trip to Walt Disney World. Just go to willwildersweeps.com and register. This contest is only open to those in the continental U.S., and I hope you have a Wilder adventure with your family. All the info is at RaymondArroyo.com. My tour schedule is there as well. I'll be in Buffalo, New York on Friday, March 10th at 7 p.m. at St. Christopher's Church on Niagara Falls Boulevard. All you folks in Canada, come on down. Then on Thursday, March 16th, I'm in the Cleveland area. I'll be at the Barnes & Noble on Chagrin Boulevard at 6:30 p.m. Will and I cannot wait to see you all on the road. When we return, the President outlined his agenda in an address to a joint session of Congress this week. How did his message come across to lawmakers and to the American people? MSNBC contributor Michael STEELE will tell us when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us. We just need the courage to share the dreams that fill our hearts, the bravery to express the hopes that stir our souls, and the confidence to turn those hopes and those dreams into action.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was President Donald Trump striking a very different and optimistic tone. During his speech before a joint session of Congress this week, supporters and critics alike seem to agree that this was the best speech of his political life. The president outlined agenda items, including the economy, immigration, infrastructure, and health care. Here for analysis is the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, now a political contributor to MSNBC, Michael STEELE. Welcome back.
In your neighborhood.
Hey, I want to start with your take on what you saw here. He really needed to do this. The question is, why did he wait so long? Why didn't he do this during the inauguration?
Well, and the question is, can he do it again? You know, but you're absolutely right. It is a work in progress for him, and something that the president, I think, realized. Given where he is in the polls right now, below 45% in some polls with approval, given the internal structure and frustration and back and forth and backstabbing that's going on right now in the West Wing over the last 40 days, he wanted to come out and nail this. He took control of the speech from the beginning. Stephen Miller wrote it and really sort of captured what the president wanted. So it turned out to be a great speech. And you talked about the top of the segment about his, the best speech of his political life. Well, his political life is about 18 months old, so not bad, right?
Well, look.
But he did what he had to do, Raymond, and that was the big thing. There was a lot of nervousness in the party about how this would play off. And then more importantly, people are already thinking to afterwards, what do I say in front of the press if this tanks? So you saw last night the Republicans smiling from ear to ear with the whole thing. It was a lot of fun to watch. The president did a good job. And I think now the question is, can he put the next foot in front of the last one and repeat what
Continue this. 7 in 10 in a CNN poll said he's moving the country in the right direction after watching this speech. Who do you think he moved?
I think he moved independents. I think that is a reflection of independent voters out there who were once termed Reagan Democrats. Those folks who came out in this election on the hope, wing, and prayer that Donald Trump would be the disruptor in chief, that he would be the president who would deconstruct, which is why the language that Bannon used last week at CPAC was deliberate, because it reflects an attitude that they've picked up in their internal polling about how people feel about this process. So the idea of deconstructing statecraft, state government, all of the national government, meaning, was an important part of this. And I think that speech last night sort of locked in for the time being. Because the battle of legislation begins next.
Well, I want to revisit something we talked about a little earlier, which is ideologically, this agenda is changing the very nature of the Republican Party, but we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to play this bite. This was about education, and get your reaction to it.
Education is the civil rights issue of our time. I am calling upon members of both parties to pass an education bill that funds school choice for disadvantaged youth, including millions of African American and Latino children. These families should be free to choose the public, private, charter, magnet, religious, or homeschool that is right for them.
Do you see this gaining momentum in the Congress?
I do, because keep in mind, John Boehner championed that very ideal during his time as Speaker, and the Opportunity Scholars and the Opportunity Scholarships from D.C. is an example of that. So the fact that the Obama administration, from its inception, went after that program, and in its later budgets actually defunded it, and until the Congress figured out a way to put it back in many cases, to have this president now come forward and make that statement, I think is for those of us who have fought in this field for some time, in education reform, looking at vouchers, looking at charters, looking at homeschooling, all of that should feel really good about what the president is saying about broadening the reach of education in this country.
Do you agree with the president as an African American that this is the civil rights issue of our time?
It is one of the civil rights issues. As a friend of mine put it to me recently, he said, well, the civil rights issue of this time seemed to be civil rights in some cases. But it is one, and I do agree with that, because in terms of how we look at educating the next generation, let alone this generation, you've got to come to the table with a brand new set of tools, and the president, at least rhetorically, is willing to do that. Now, his education secretary's had some missteps in this last week of Black History Month, but the reality of it is the forward-thinking part of the process, I think, is good for the argument.
I got to move on to this because it speaks to the changing nature of the party during this Trump era. It was a major portion of the speech, and it had to do with spending, massive spending. Watch.
I am sending Congress a budget that rebuilds the military, eliminates the defense sequester, and calls for one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history. To launch our national rebuilding, I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure of the United States, financed through both public and private capital, creating millions of new jobs.
Now, Michael Steele, as the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, how do you create what the president here is calling an investment of $1 trillion in infrastructure, the largest spending on military, blowing the sequester away? How do you pay for this? Where does the money come from?
That is going to be a reconciliation for conservative fiscal hawks in the House in particular. This is not what they ran on in 2010, certainly not part of the argument that we were making to the country when we got them elected, that we wanted to restore fiscal balance, we wanted to restore fiscal responsibility, conservative stewardship of your taxpayer dollars. You have now a Republican president who's come into office talking about spending $1 trillion on infrastructure, $54 billion just on defense. So it's going to be over a period of about 10 years. You're looking at adding roughly $6 trillion plus to the national debt. So the question becomes for those conservative fiscal hawks, how do you pay for it? And I think that's going to be a major battle in the House. You've already begun to hear, Raymond, I'm sure in your travels you run into it, members on the Hill going, well, I don't know about all of that. I'm not feeling $1 trillion.
Yeah, that Freedom Caucus isn't going along.
They're not going for that. And the fact of the matter is, if it's bloated spending that is not targeted and specifically identified, it's just money going for infrastructure, just as we saw with Obama's $860 billion at the beginning of his term for, shovel-ready projects, et cetera. It won't go far.
Okay. What does this portend? Because what we're seeing here, this bouquet of issues, whether it's maternity pay, whether it's infrastructure spending, and then coupling that with defunding things like Planned Parenthood, this defies ideological categorization. This seems to be the remaking of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, because I think that that's an important element of all that's happening right now. This president, as I've said, and no one can be offended or should be offended by it, he's not a Republican, he's not a conservative. So let's be clear about that. He's a populist, and he's a nationalist.
And he ran against both parties.
And he ran against both parties, and that's important to note. He ran against both parties. Bernie Sanders did pretty much the same, largely from the progressive side, although he didn't really dally too much with Republicans in what we were going through. He was focused on a separate agenda, but they meet up. And you had that voter who was the Trump-Sanders voter during the primary. Well, they're now the middle of the country. And what Donald Trump is talking about is reshaping ideologically and as well as on policy where the Republican Party has stood. Big government republicanism is now populism, Republican populism. They rejected that at the end of the Bush term, as you recall. A lot of folks pushed back on that in 2006 and 2008. He's remaking it with economic nationalism, and I don't know how easy that pill will be swallowed by a lot of those conservatives on the Hill. But more importantly, the base of the party, after 4 years of this, what does it look like?
Yeah, there was a beautiful moment where he called out this and gave attention to that Navy SEAL, Ryan Owens, who was killed in that operation. His widow stood. It was a very emotional, beautiful moment. And the president gave her time. It was the biggest applause of the night.
Yeah.
2 minutes. That attention to the military and to those in law enforcement, how important is that? And does that buy him capital to move things like immigration reform that is going to be very thorny on both sides?
I think it does. I think that, the country has moved into a law and order space in large measure, not because there's rampant crime, although they keep churning that narrative, but it's a testament to how people feel. They feel less safe for some reason, some unidentifiable reason in many cases. So that argument about securing our borders, tying it to national interest, national security, then wrapping in those elements where you have an illegal immigrant who commits a crime, kills someone, that brings it back into the neighborhood. So now we got to secure the neighborhood from not just ISIS and those folks out there, but from those who snuck in through the back door. So that all plays into a narrative that people have that they are uncomfortable. And it does give him the ability, I think, to stretch the argument on immigration, for example, and push against Republicans who may be resistant to the kinds of reforms that he wants to put in place.
Final question. Congress doesn't seem to be moving too quickly. They've done next to nothing. I know there's a lot of chitter-chatter, but no bills, not one bill of substance. We're a month into this. We're a month into this administration. What's happening? Why are they slow walking this thing?
Because they're uncertain about exactly what Donald Trump is going to do next, what he's already done, what does it mean? We've seen the blowback on the immigration executive action that he's put forth. He's now going to probably release that by the end of this week, early next week. And people are sitting back and waiting to see whether or not the administration is really going to move forward on some things. The other thing is they're waiting for the president to identify people that need to fill in some of those sub-cabinet positions so that they can approve those as well. So you've got this bottleneck on policy as well as personnel that's kind of slowed things down on the Hill.
Well, the stacking and the release of legislation, is so important.
It's important.
And if you get that sequencing wrong, it can doom an agenda.
That's an important point, and I think that's something the administration's got to be mindful now about after the speech.
Very good. Michael
All right,
Steele,
buddy.
thank you as
Take
always.
care.
We'll look for you next time. Coming up, the tables are going to be turned on me. Blogger and author extraordinaire Lisa HENDEY is here to interview me about the next installment of my Will Wilder saga, out March 7th. High Adventures just around the corner when the World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. For only the second time in the 20-year history of this show, I'm going to step away from my role as host and allow someone else to ask the questions. Book 2 of my Will Wilder Adventures series, Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders, hits bookstores everywhere on Tuesday, March 7th. Tonight, I've invited author, blogger, and editor of CatholicMom.com, Lisa HENDEY, to interview me about the book. So with that, I turn it over to Lisa HENDEY. Now, it's your show for the next few minutes.
Every viewer's dream, the chance to interview Raymond Arroyo. Is this a first?
No,
for you
it's not a
being interviewed
first.
on your
Only
show?
Dean Koontz has done this before.
Oh, well, my goodness, I'm
So
in
you are in
auspicious territory.
That's right. You are in
Well,
good
Mr.
company.
Arroyo, congratulations on the publication of Will Wilder 2.
Thank you.
The Lost Staff of Wonders. It's such an, as a Will Wilder fan, I can tell you that I've been anxiously awaiting the drop of the book.
oh, you're
you know,
very
this
kind.
book is getting such great reviews already, and Booklist has called it exciting. Comparing it to such greats as Indiana Jones, the Percy Jackson series. So how's this book different from those?
Well, I'll tell you how it's different. My series doesn't revolve around mythology as the Rick Riordan Percy Jackson series does, or Indiana Jones. Really, he went around the world collecting these artifacts. In my book, you're dealing with real artifacts and real relics that you can find in libraries, in museums, in churches all over the world. I liked that idea. The other thing that's rare in children's literature, except for your Time Traveler series, is that it is a family adventure.
Right.
You have an intact family that goes on the adventure with Will. His great Aunt Lucille, his mother, his father, his siblings, his friends. I've always been bothered by the idea that in so much middle grade literature, which is that beautiful age between like 8 and 14, so many of these adventures are orphans or abandoned children sort of running off on their own to take on the world. Not only is that dangerous, it's kind of silly. I like the idea of having mentors that at times frustrate and at times help Will to further his ends. But we all need that, and that tension. I love the tension of that. That family sometimes is needed to give you perspective and guidance, and sometimes they don't understand what's happening. And they grow in understanding as well when you go on an adventure together. That seems to me the nature of family.
I love that Will is imperfect.
Is he
that
imperfect?
we see him in the first book kind of develop and discover his gift, and,
Yeah.
and maybe sometimes even fight a little bit against
You
it.
bet.
And so I'm wondering, is there a little bit of Raymond and Will, and,
Oh,
and
yeah.
is Perilous Falls a place that maybe is close to your heart
It's
in
very
the real
close
world?
to my heart. It is. Will, I always tell people, Will's mischievousness, Will's sense of daring has a lot to do with me as a child. I was that kid. But some of his personality, some of the reactions he has, I picked that up from children I knew in school, from my own children. And then I watch a lot. I mean, as I do school visits, you see the interaction, the relationship kids have. And that type of kid, there's that boy who kind of marches to his own drummer. That's Will. I mean, he's wearing his pith helmet and he's kind of, going on his adventures, and he's wearing his red high tops. He's just got his own thing going. And that's attractive to some kids. And to others, he's a nerd. But really, he's the most important kid in town. And he's only becoming aware of how important he is. But that comes with the requisite fears and trepidation that we all experience as we're growing up. And I like that he doesn't have all the answers, that he makes big mistakes. That's part of, I think, growing up. And I didn't want this perfect Pollyanna protagonist at the center of an adventure. That's not a fun adventure to me. I always like the kind of flawed hero, and Will Wilder is that to me.
I have to talk to you a little bit about your process, because in consuming these books and reading them, and in the audio process, especially with having voiced the audio characters, there are just these very kind of high action scenes, and I'm wondering, were you surprised that this came out of your imagination, and how does that scenery develop?
I spend a lot of time outlining, so I'm looking for those moments, and I know, I mean, I'm the author of the book. I'm also the audience of the book initially, like you know this. You're a stand-in for the audience. So I'm looking for moments that are going to be dramatic, revealing, and it's a balancing act. What I love about these books is I have mothers who read them, I have aunts, I have uncles, I have boys, I have girls. It's a cross-spectrum and cross-generation that have sort of embraced the first book, which I didn't really expect. I mean, I wrote it for that middle grade audience with an eye. I mean, there's material here that no kid is going to get. That's, you know, it's going to lie in wait for them for when they return to it as adults. But I love the idea that they've all embraced it for different reasons, but that engine, the engine of the plot, what Will wants in each book, the stakes have to be really high to keep my attention. And so I love those action sequences. They usually open with a big flashback to Jacob Wilder, Will's great-grandfather.
Yes.
And I like those kind of big concept action moments that set up the whole book. You find out where the particular relic that Will is going to be dealing with in the next 300 pages, where it came from, what its source is, and how it entered the family museum at the center of Perilous Falls, and why it's important. And so but it's a challenge. You know the challenge of this as a writer.
Absolutely.
You've got to do all the
there's
research.
action, but there's also this meticulous attention to a little bit of theology, definitely to history,
Absolutely.
to accuracy. You know, in this particular second book, we're looking at the lost staff of wonders, the staff of Moses, and we reference back to in the prologue to the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, to the previous adventure. So, talk a little bit about why the placement of such historical artifacts and theological context within an action-adventure story, and how kids are gravitating towards that.
Well,
in that way.
my thought always, and it's partially from growing up in a place like New Orleans, history is never dead. History is the future, and it is the past. And if you don't know it, as Tobias Shin, who's one of Will's mentors, says in the first book, if you don't know your past, you'll never discover your future, Mr. Wilder. And that, to me, is kind of the spine of the whole series. The decisions of our grandparents and great-grandparents, our mother or father, they do light our path. They do determine, in part, our future. And you have to understand that. So I love the touchstones of history. And part of this is a cry for parents, for families, for kids, to be aware that there's this history within reach. And what I love is the relics and artifacts, most of them in the books, you can go find. And I get pictures. Kids send me pictures on Twitter, or they email me pictures. They go to a museum and they see something I mentioned in the book. Look, I got it. I'm going to get in and go wherever. Look, a sarcophagus. Can I travel with this? In this book, the staff of Moses, as you said, is the central relic. What I realized is Moses' brother Aaron's staff was in the Ark of the Covenant. So I knew I had to work that in and somehow get the two staffs in this story. Well, when I started doing research, a friend of mine in Canada had been to Axum, Ethiopia. And I had read about this, but there is a very peculiar Orthodox quasi-Jewish order of monks who claim to be in possession of the Ark of the Covenant. They have claimed this for thousands of years. There is a guardian, a single monk whose life's work is to protect the Ark of the Covenant. It's in a caged-off chapel. He is the only one who has access to it. So I loved the idea of that. I did a lot of research on it, and the whole history of Axum. The Queen of Sheba went to Jerusalem. She and King Solomon got together. This is how, according to the monks, the Ark of the Covenant makes its way to Ethiopia with the Queen of Sheba and her son. It's a fascinating history. And like the staff of Moses, the reason this all came up, I was reading an article in a British paper from a professor who claimed the staff of Moses is in a museum in Birmingham, England, not Birmingham, Alabama. And now there's another museum in Istanbul that claims the staff of Moses as well. Now, personally, after doing a lot of research, I don't think either of these are credible. However, I loved the idea that you could go and look under glass and there might be the staff of Moses. So I did a lot of research on it. I went back to the Jewish Midrash and found all kinds of fascinating things about the staff. It was supposedly made of sapphire. People forget Moses pulled it from his father-in-law's garden. That's how he claimed his wife, which is the archetype for King Arthur pulling Excalibur from the stone. So we owe a lot to Moses' staff.
And to the Bible and the Old Testament,
Right.
so rich in imagery that could create these beautiful stories.
Yeah.
So storytelling and going out and being with children in schools. Now you have this initiative, Storyented,
Yeah.
and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the school visits that you're making, the visits with readers, and how children are receiving this beautiful work that
It
you're
has
doing.
been incredible for me and unexpected. I mean, as you know, I've written for adults, I've spoken to
Right.
groups. There is nothing like a child and watching a child open your book and get lost in a world that you created and help make, because you only do half the job. They do the other half. But a child absorbs these characters. They don't read about a character. They become that character. And that's the big thing I've learned. They are so invested in Will, in his world, in the other characters. They want to go on an adventure. And isn't that true of all of us, but particularly the young? They want to go on that adventure of life. They want to go on that adventure, that next vacation. They are so in it. And these books have sort of, I think, awakened that imagination, a sense of history for them. And we were in New Orleans. We gave a copy of the first book when it first released to St. Stephen's School in New Orleans. And then I recently went back and we gave them the second. And the things that the kids and the principal told me, I literally had tears in my eyes listening. I want to share this with the audience and we'll come back. I'm taking over, but watch.
Will Wilder changed the reading habits by making them want to read. He made them read. And he made them get it. And he gave them the power to believe that they can do it.
I like how the demons are trying to take over the world, and Will is on his way to stop the demons and to protect like all the relics that the demons are trying to get.
So they're Will Wilder. Like they become him. And the demons are their demons. Their demon could be a neighbor shooting. Their demon can be dodging bullets. Their demon could be alcoholic parents, or, you know, I mean, that can be their demon. So even though it's mythical, it still gives you a hope that you can escape, right? That you can fight all of these demons and you can come out on top. You can be Will Wilder.
He adventurous. He's not scared of anything.
And I like how Will's adventurous spirit like made him go and get the relics so, you know, he could find out more about it. But then like when trouble started to happen, he fixed his own mistake, and I like how he did that.
You can conquer those demons. And I think that's why a lot of them like it.
This book is amazing and an adventure about the things that you can't do. And if you believe it enough, you can do it.
Will Wilder, he makes you escape from the real world. You know, and he's a kid, so it's like, that could be me. I can save the world.
Right.
And they can, and they will. They will save the world.
That's an
your
unintended, this is an unintended consequence of the book.
Right.
I never thought that it would have that kind of value and touch lives the way it has. But it's been incredible. An incredible thing for me to watch.
So such a gift to know how you're really impacting children right where they are, and I willing to bet that you've ruined many a bedtime with families saying, just one more chapter,
Yeah.
one more chapter, let's keep going. I know from my own days of sharing stories with my children, the joy of going on an adventure as a family. But in today's world, a lot of our kids have screens in their faces. So what are some of your tips for parents who might be parents of reluctant readers? Because I feel like Will could be the person inviting them to rediscover the joy of a great book.
Well, what I love about it, and I've gotten so many letters and pictures of families who they had a reluctant reader in the house, and the Will Wilder series was really written initially for reluctant readers, particularly boys, who are the ones who, you know, they're not much on the written word. So because it's an adventure series, because we have these incredible, I mean, I do love the covers. Jeff Nenthrop, who is the illustrator, did such a fantastic job.
And isn't it amazing to see your character come to life in that way?
I love it. And he has captured this kind of cinematic quality throughout the books. I mean, the interior art is just as compelling. And so kids are drawn to that. They want to go on that ride when they see it. And when they start reading it, the parents will read it with them, which I found fascinating. And then they have this conversation about their own family history and what these relics are. Is this real? Can I see this? Where is it? They go online together. And some of them are listening to the audiobook, too, on family trips.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I'm a huge fan of your audio narrations of these particular books. And I have to say, Raymond, that I know you not to be schizophrenic, but you voice your various characters with such convincing reality. And I know you have a few favorites. So how was it to kind of channel your inner Aunt Lucille, or your Bartimaeus, or your Tobias Chin?
Well, I was trained as an actor. So when I build a character, I do the same background and the same breakdown that I did as an actor. What is their intention, their background, where do they grow up, what do they do, vocal tics, all of that I'm very attentive to. So as I'm writing, I'm hearing the characters' voices.
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Oh yeah, and I usually voice it as I'm editing, not when I'm writing so much as when I'm editing, because you're trying to make sure that voice is
and that it's as
up.
it's read aloud, that there's
works.
a certain cadence to the writing that flows.
Exactly, and you want that tonality. So as I was telling you, I sometimes write at a Starbucks, and I'd be writing in the corner, and there was a woman who came in every afternoon, and she would look over, and you can feel when people are looking at you. And one day she came over, and after months of this, and she slid a card at the edge of my laptop, and she said, I don't mean to interrupt you, but are you hearing voices? And I said, well, I get paid for doing that. And I looked down at the card. She was a psychologist from Johns Hopkins. So I'm glad I actually had cover and I was writing, so it was okay.
The partnership with your publisher, with Crown Random House, this is a new adventure for you too. And how has it been to work with them and the resources that they're creating for young readers?
Their commitment, Crown Random House's commitment to Will Wilder has been truly the greatest publishing experience of my life. I mean, I've published, I don't know how many books, 7 books, 8 books now. Never have I had a team this devoted. And Barbara Marcus, who is the president of Random House, took Will Wilder to her heart at the very beginning. She wanted to publish this. And Barbara is an icon in the business. I mean, this is the woman who published The Babysitter's Club, the Goosebumps series at Scholastic, and she is the woman who discovered J.K. Rowling and published the Harry Potter series. So to be in her hands and to have Emily Easton, my editor, to have Phoebe Ye, my publisher at Crown, to be so supportive every step of the way. I mean, from marketing to final say on the covers, to input on everything. I mean, even the design, I mean, I can't rhapsodize enough. Even the design of the cover, just the hard book itself is so beautifully done. There's like this edging they put on the cover of the book. There's no attention to detail that they left unexplored, and they've been magnificent, really.
So as we, are ensconced in the season of Lent and really looking at our own devotional practices, I'm kind of curious what you think about how family story time and personal reading for kids can be part of their Lenten journey, and how perhaps Will Wilder might be a special part of this Lent in homes.
Well, part of what I discovered on school visits is kids, and you know this having written a series, kids love series. They want the story to go on.
Right.
And I think this time of year particularly is a time when we focus on this greatest story.
Yes.
It's important to let kids explore their own interests. And I think adventure stories, particularly those like Will Wilder, like the Time Travelers, they take children on a journey with characters that they can understand. It's a safe zone. It's also a place, certainly in my books, where good and evil do come into contact and vie. And I try to be true in a way that is a little scary around the edges. There are monsters and demons and things that pop up here. But I see correlations in the real world. I mean, we heard it from that principal, from Rosie Kendrick earlier. There are real world implications here. And as Aunt Lucille says in the second book, there are great wonders and great evils that, whether you acknowledge them or not, they're there, they're present. And all these characters in their own way begin to understand that. So I think sharing not only other people's stories like ours, but sharing a family's journey is really important for children. And because they're fascinated by it. And we often don't stop and take that time. And what I love about the families who've read this series together is it's opened up that conversation. I had a Jewish mother last year write me and say, you know, we started talking and my son asked me about his great-grandfather, who was a rabbi. And she started telling that whole background.
The lore of the family.
The whole lore of the family. And the kid was fascinated. He'd never heard this. So, you know, he said he calls himself Will now because, you know, there's this whole unexplored family history that was opened up to him. And it was because of the books. I love that. That's what I really want of this. Families to come together, to have an emotional experience, and that's what the books are designed to do, and to provoke questions and challenge them on certain levels. But this is a wild ride. In this book, the staff of Moses goes missing. Will is blamed for the missing staff.
Yes.
And before he knows it, this very strange soothsayer from Egypt has arrived in town, promising the world. And the plagues of the Old Testament start befalling the town. The clock is ticking against Will and his friends and his family, who have to discover not only the staff of Moses, who has it, but who's using it,
right,
and the identity of that person. So there are multiple mysteries. I always loved mysteries as a kid, so it kind of found its way out in this particular book.
And you're laying some mythology perhaps for future adventures. I can tell there are little hints that have been seeded into the book. So can you give us any hints about what might be to come next, or just that we should stay tuned?
There are a lot of setups here. The first book laid an awful lot of foundations. So there are clues in that first book that won't pay off until way down the line. But it's envisioned this will be a multi-book series. I'm working on book 3 now. I love going to Perilous Falls, but as you know, it's a lonely adventure too, because it's really you and, you know, the voices in your head. But I love it because what I do is after I finish a chapter, I'll read it to my children and their friends, and they give me instant feedback. So it's
and honest feedback.
Honest feedback, which I love, because they'll say that character's boring, I don't like that, why did you do that? That doesn't add up to the first book, you know. They'll catch me on things, and that is so important because I'd rather have it now than when I go on a school visit. So,
and I'm sure your readers everywhere will want to know, do you ever envision something screen-oriented for Will
We are
Wilder?
talking to some studios who are interested, and we'll see.
Come on, friends, let's make it happen.
We'll see.
How can readers find out more about the Will Wilder series, and specifically The Lost Staff of Wonders, Will Wilder 2?
They can go to my website, RaymondArroyo.com. It's available at Amazon, the EWTN Religious Catalog, Barnes & Noble, your independent bookstores, which need your support, really anywhere. You can get the book anywhere, but I love that it's a double book now, so it's a real series in the making. And you find a lot of kids who won't pick up a book if there's not a second.
And I recommend to young readers that they definitely grab both at the same time, because the minute you finish number 1, you're going to want to go right into The Lost Staff of Wonders.
Yeah, well, I seed in a lot of cliffhangers so that you want to kind of, you want to keep, you know, I'm trying to raise a generation of page flippers. That's what I'm looking for, kids that really are immersed in the story. I believe if you give a child a story they want to read, they will read. And a practiced reader is a good reader, and that's what you're looking for. And you asked earlier about strategies to parents, and I didn't answer your question. Read to your children. Take them to the library and the bookstore. Let them select their own book. If they pick their own book, if they choose it, there's a 93% chance that they will read that book as opposed to being given one. So it's good to direct them, but at the beginning of their reading adventure, let them select things they're interested in, whether it's horses or castles or armies. Let them find their way. They will.
Well, on behalf of all of your readers, I thank you for the adventure that has been Will Wilder, and for all that's yet to come. I'm ready to grab my pep helmet.
Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna make you an honorary resident of Perilous Falls after all that.
Thank you, and best of luck, and many prayers for what's to come in this series and with all of your work, Raymond.
Thank you. Will Wilder 2, The Lost Staff of Wonders, hits bookstores March 7th. I hope you'll get a copy for you and your family. When we return, a controversial environmental conference was held this week at the Vatican. But why was the press excluded? Member of the papal posse, Robert Royal, was there. He joins us to explain when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. The Pontifical Council for Social Sciences sponsored a controversial workshop at the Vatican this week. It was called Biological Extinction: How to Save the Natural Environment on Which We Depend. Population control advocate Dr. Paul Ehrlich was invited to speak, but the press and the public were excluded at the last minute. What is the purpose of this workshop, and why was attendance restricted? My next guest was there. Please welcome, via satellite from Rome, a member of the papal posse, Robert Royal. Robert, why was this bioextinction workshop set up in the first place, and whose idea was it to frame it in the way that it ended up being framed?
Well, of course, we can't know this. It's clear that the administration at the Pontifical Academy for the Sciences allowed this to take place. But a lot of what I hear in Rome is that basically the selections here are being driven by people like Jeffrey Sachs and Michael Schenck at the UN. And as I've said, you could dispute that around the edges. There were a few Catholics here and there, but it's hard to see how this program would have been much different if it had been actually run by one of the UN population agencies rather than the Pontifical Academy for the Sciences.
And the focus was on population control, obviously. I mean, you had Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb author, the leading advocate of population control. He spoke about just this topic. Were there any other scientists or social scientists there to counter Ehrlich and defend the church teaching on population?
Well, I mean, this was not a conference specifically on population control or population, but even if you look at the description of the way the bioextinction subject was set up in the Pontifical Academy's own brochure, it's clear that they're emphasizing the growth in human numbers and the dangers this represents to other parts of the natural world. I mean, there's no celebration of the fact that human beings are largely able to feed one another and to flourish on the face of the earth, even though there are 7 billion of us right now. So although it looked at a certain point, this is one of the reasons why I came here. I wasn't planning on it, and it isn't usually the kind of event I would come to, but it wasn't only Paul Ehrlich. And Paul Ehrlich is notorious for his advocacy of population control. And in fact, when the Holy Father published his encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, last year, Paul Ehrlich said in the Guardian, the Manchester Guardian, that the encyclical was raving nonsense. Those are his words, raving nonsense, unless it also included population control. And if you look at the lineup of the speakers at this event, it wasn't only him, but there were two of his close collaborators, one from Cambridge, another one, Peter Raven, and then John Bongartz. John Bongartz was another very controversial figure for his comments on population, and he was included actually at the panel discussion that presented Laudato Si. So although this was not technically focused on population, there were at least 4 major population controllers as speakers. There were a scientist whose opinion I trust on this, who was also here and not admitted. I was not admitted to the event this week. Told me that there were a couple of people he knew whose scientific work was first rate and who also seemed to have had Catholic backgrounds. But you know how these conferences are. When the large number of speakers tends in one direction, the 1 or 2 who are sort of exceptions or tokens tend not to speak out. The balance could really have been a different way.
And what is driving this? Some have said that this signals Vatican acceptance of population control. What are you hearing on the ground?
Yeah, I hear from some people that they believe that that's true. I myself would be careful about making charges like this. You know, many people accuse other people these days of all sorts of other things. I think we need a little bit more proof than what we have right now. But if you just looked at the fact of the matter about who was invited and who was not allowed into the room, certainly it seems to tend in that direction that if there's not going to be outright support for the kind of UN population control that's very commonly promoted out of New York and other offices these days, there certainly isn't a lot of opposition to it. There have been a lot of friends of mine who've been involved in pro-life activities and defense of religious liberty who've been saying for years that they're very nervous about the way that the Holy See is drawn close to these UN agencies without sufficient caution about the downsides, like the population control, the pushing of pills, of condoms, and of abortion.
I want to quickly mention this before we run out of time here, Robert. Pope Francis dismissed all the members of the Pontifical Academy for Life in December. Now, none of those members have been reinstated. Have you heard anything in Rome about what happened here? Some say this was retribution because most of the members were questioning the Pope's teaching in Amoris Laetitia.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories going around here in Rome, and some say it's just a matter of retirements and maybe there'll be some reappointments. It seems clear that this papacy has a certain paradox in that the Holy Father on the one hand keeps talking about decentralizing, and because he's set up what I keep hearing people call the parallel curia, which is his closest collaborators, like Bishop Sanchez Sorondo at the Pontifical Academy for the Sciences, like Archbishop Paglia, who oversees the Pontifical Academy for Life. It makes it appear, whether it's a fact or not, that the Pope is directly himself doing these things. And it may be that he's doing them, it may be that he's not doing them. But there certainly everything seems to go back to him. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of insulation. Now, I think that the proof here, and since there are so many charges, I keep saying this, people accusing people of one thing or another and suspicious, I myself am going to wait and see who is reappointed. And I think we'll be able to tell very, very clearly by who is allowed back or who is appointed as a new member of the Pontifical Academy for Life, what exactly is going on here.
Robert Arroyo, thank you for reporting for us, and we'll see you when you get back.
Thank you.
You can read Robert's columns on the Vatican's Biological Extinction Workshop at thecatholicthing.org. Well, that is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. You can like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, along with my Wilder Adventure contest and tour dates. Be sure to join us next week, a very special program. We'll commemorate our 20th anniversary. Can you believe it's been 20 years? I look it, but you know, who knew? Featuring the best and the brightest moments from the world over. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.